The Messianic can be plural. It doesn't have to be authoritarian. That's a terrible mistake to think it is. And the only reason it's been authoritarian is because ever since ancient Egypt, we had the boy pharaohs of Egypt, the 11-year-olds who suddenly were the tyrants of Egypt and decided absolutely everything and started by killing all the priests so they get rid of any opposition to their own truths. Okay, these guys built the pyramids, the most useless things ever built in human history. These guys also created the moon landing in 1969, which was absolutely useless. So when the boys dream about being gods, we have the problems with the phalluses that go wrong. And we also should watch out before we look for a phallus, watch out for the fake phalluses. And they're always the ones that are cheap, go straight to the heart to us, and appeal to our dirtiest shadows inside of us. And they do so by uniting us around something we can hate.
Oh, yeah, the scapegoat again, or the abject in your terminology. Right, I was just thinking that. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. René Girard writes extensively about this. Julia Kristeva writes extensively about this. One of the great achievements of European 20th century philosophy was the understanding of scapegoating and how fundamental it is to human identity.
Yeah.
But
so let's pause there, because that's very, very important, right? So this phallus you're talking about, okay, is the danger of it is when it becomes a mechanism for scapegoating, you know?
Yes.
So and that's the danger. So that's what we have to avoid, and that's how we can understand what a healthy phallus vision would be. Yeah.
Exactly. And this is where René Girard comes into the picture, who was a French philosopher, very influential in America. And I think because Girard said that scapegoating is the only way we can unify, that's how we always unify people, then of course, then you assume that all utopian visions are bad and dangerous and must be avoided. But that is just an intellectual disqualification that's not permitted. You got to go back and retry everything, even if you failed 1,000 times before, because you got to look at every option. You got to turn every stone. Otherwise, you're not a philosopher. So you go back and study it and see what did go wrong and why. And then you discover that we also have beautiful phallic missions that actually have been accomplished in history. And because they have been accomplished, they were successful, phalluses can certainly exist and they can save humanity if you like. So, for example, Declaration, Zoroastrianism, 3,700 years ago, kickstarted a religion that we can use today, 3,700 years later, and say that, wait a second, it is genuinely the phallic visions that have changed humanity for the better throughout history. And every time we got stuck and needed saving, it was phallic visions that did that. So,
Give me some examples, some historical examples.
Okay. You got to understand, first of all, that this is from the perspective of the people who leave one territory to go into the next one. I mean, hey, when the Hebrews arrived in the Promised Land, they committed genocide. So you got to understand that it's depending on the circumstances, what was available to you. It might not necessarily look good for everybody in a universal manner. Of course, we hope now with the machines we can do it a bit more smoothly and less bloody. But at the end of the day, say for example, Columbus conquering America put Europe into a golden age. Then somebody protested, said, well, look at the Native Americans and how badly they were treated and they got sick from smallpox and everything. Well, that's absolutely true. But from the perspective of European culture, you cannot deny the fact that Europe prospered, conquered 3 continents, and became the wealthiest part of the planet. And eventually, the really messianic part of that was, of course, in the 19th century, when Bildung arrived as an ideal in Germany and Scandinavia, and people realize that if everybody can read and write and count in a society, if everybody gets schooling, we'll all be better off. That is the genuine messianic. The trick with the messianic is that it's somebody finds out a game that everybody benefits from, and where the overall cost-benefit analysis is just an enormous benefit compared to the cost involved. So that's often when the messianic appears. But
I want to go a little bit back, because your examples, again, there was always a scapegoat involved, right? I just finished reading Girard's book, so I have this in mind. So when Columbus went to America, the scapegoat might be the savage, or when the Jews went to the Promised Land.
No. There was no scapegoat involved. I mean, people in America were treated horribly, no doubt about that. But there wasn't scapegoating involved. Columbus did not go back to Europe and said, I need to raise bigger funds so that we can kill the awful savages of America. No, he went back and said, I plunder them, I've taken their gold away from them, and I can get you more gold if you give me more money to more boats. Okay, fair enough. That's not the same thing as scapegoating. That difference is very, very important to make, that distinction. So at the end of the day, it's often after military victories, say Napoleon, he plundered Europe, you know, but even in 1807, at the foreword of Phenomenology of Spirit, Hegel writes to the German people, I know that Napoleon plundered us last year. I know he raped all our daughters, killed all our sons, literally says that. Yeah. And I know that was the apocalypse. It was the apocalypse. It was the apocalypse. Germany is totally torn apart. I don't care, writes Hegel. Napoleon is the zeitgeist. He is the shit. He is the time spirit. He is the new thing. All we Germans need to do is to imitate him and construct different kinds of institutions based on Napoleon's system. And that is the birth of the modern nation state. If you don't understand war, and if you don't understand conquest, and if you don't understand that war can benefit you when you go to war, you don't understand hunting. That's exactly where we're stuck with social justice warriors who are aggressive vegans and go after people because of the tonality of their etiquette. The fucked up situation we're currently in, especially in North America and increasingly Europe, is because we don't understand phallic energy. And we lost respect for it, and we think we have to get away from it and medicate ourselves out of it. And that is terrible. That will be the ultimate disaster, because it was precisely the kind of environment in Germany in the 1920s. Okay, none of these guys we talk about here are part of the Anglo-Saxon spiritual discourse at the moment ever go to martial arts scholars. It's like they refuse to understand masculine sexual energy. Okay? If you try to avoid that, and that's half of humanity, how the fuck are you going to take people out of an existential crisis? Like I said, this is all like people sitting in Egypt refusing to move, not listening to Moses and Aaron because they're dangerous, because they're utopian, right? Okay. Well, Moses and Aaron did go off to the country and create genocide. That's true. But at least they got you out of slavery. So you're stuck in Egypt and you're having your little coffee, you sip the coffee, you talk about tonality and etiquette, and you didn't even see that you're chained. So what should we do then? And that maybe that's the point. Like, where should we go and what should we do? And I'm working on the grand narrative. Yeah. I think any decent philosopher today has to do that. And there are two ways of doing it. You either go down into deep history, which John Farvarkey and Jordan Peterson and Camille Paglia do brilliantly. Okay. I also go into deep history. I possibly go deeper than they do. I go into what Gilles Deleuze called the nomadology. So understanding why humans have to be on the move. Also understanding why time is essential rather than space. Also understand why process is essential rather than object. Farvarkey agrees with me on all these things. The great thing with Buddhism and Zoroastrianism is they're both monist and they're both process-oriented. So the two religions have a lot in common. They're just two different narratives. And the Buddhist one, which is Farvarkey, is that I need to get everybody with me. I need to push everybody forward. I need to make people survive because otherwise they fall into the chaos. That is Jordan Peterson. This is John Farvarkey. This is what they work with. But where are people going to go? They don't respond to that question. It's like they're still sitting there completely obsessed with the etiquette of the dinner party, and no dinner is served. There's no content. Okay, so content is phallic. So where's the next question is, where's the promised land? Well, it's certainly not on the moon. Yeah, or Mars. The promised land, the name of the promised land is Ecotopia. Okay. The name of the promised land is the Cosmopole. So the Cosmopole, the idea that all the world becomes one city. The idea of Ecotopia is that the entire planet is cultivated and we have sensors everywhere to measure climate and weather and everything, so we know what we're doing. And we create a sustainable system where we exploit resources rather than exploit resources, which is the term imploitation. That sustainable system on this planet is Ecotopia. The hubris today is to think we're going to leave the planet. That's nonsense. We're not going to leave the planet. We can't even live outside of this planet as humans. So we're going to stay on this planet for the foreseeable future for thousands of years to come. And we're going to make sure this planet, even if we have climate change, that the costs are taken care of for climate change, and that we can still survive on this planet as human beings. And we're going to survive as human beings on this planet in collaboration with machines. And if these machines only sedate us, give us entertainment, and keep us, in mortido, like, living dead, which is where is what the internet currently does, then we're in real deep trouble. But if the machines can collaborate with us to make us more creative and more experimental, that's wonderful. Here is where I agree with Futurica completely, except that he doesn't set out a goal where we're going to go. He doesn't even give it a name. And my name for that is cosmopolitanism and ecotopianism, and we're working on a thirdism. And that's going to be the next book we're working on. We set this out of the Syntheism book, and I know.
So you don't have a name for the thirdism? Do you have kind of a
no? Why don't we throw that question? Why don't we throw that question forward to the people who follow us here, to the really wonderful, loyal followers we have who follow us in these discussions? Yes, there has to. It's going to be a third one. I sort of sense where we're heading with the third one. But Ecotopia is the name of the planet where we live sustainably.
Yeah.
Okay. The Cosmopole is the kind of life we're going to live, meaning that to get out of the nation state and to create a truly global empire that actually works, the Cosmopole is the ideal we're going to go forward to. And here, many of the very philosophers that Pagel and Peterson go after, like Derrida, for example, have done wonderful work. If they just bother to study Derrida and study Levinas and study Simon Critchley and study the other writers out there who actually work with the idea of cosmopolitanism, a lot of work has been done on cosmopolitanism, trying to essentially that we can tap into.
I like that. Yeah. I
mean,
I think that's unarguable. Like, Ecotopia, cosmopolitanism. For me, that's unarguable. I can't argue against that. I mean,
but they're not going to emerge.
What we need, and that's where we're going. I mean, that's what we're trying to do already, aren't we?
Exactly.
Despite all of our pathological obstacles to doing that.
But it's not going to emerge by some spiritual ladies having coffee, sitting, babbling together, listening to each other, authentically relating. It's not going to happen there at all. It's going to happen because some people make an effort and study engineering for years, and go into the tiny minute details of physics and biology and anything you need to work with and understand and develop whole new materials and invent new things. This is why I'm an ecotopian. I'm pro-nuclear power because we need huge amounts of cheap, abundant electricity for all this to work. We cannot save the planet unless we have cheap, abundant electricity everywhere and sensors everywhere. We can't do that. I'm also for genetically modifying things. I think genetical modification is the beauty of agriculture and the beauty of what human beings have done the past 5,000 years by creating civilization. Again, a Zoroastrian idea. We can build on the previous generations' understanding of the world. We don't have to make the mistakes, and we can then improve on things. And this constant improvement we can do because of it. Civilizationism is real. It's absolutely real. But we now need it one step further to nurture 10 billion people on this planet for the foreseeable future. And my response to that is ecotopianism and cosmopolitanism. But there's going to be more to it, because we also have to go deep into religion to understand the third aspect.
That's the third one, right?
That's the third one. Yeah. And the most important thing there, the most important thing there is to understand the difference between public teaching and mysticism. So what can be said in public and what cannot be said in public? Because what you can't say in public, you can't say something in public that people are bound to misunderstand.
Yeah.
Academia is all about publishing everything in public.
Can I throw a couple of more words for that? Is that exoteric and esoteric, or is that?
Yes, exactly. You've got it. So a new exoteric and a new esoteric have to be defined. And this is problematic because you're used to the fact that if you close the door to a room and some people sit inside the room and they're powerful, then they create a little power clique. And you want to send journalists and you want to send reporters in there and discover what they're doing and expose it and all those things. And because we live in the first stage of digital, which is all about transparency, or rather because everything will be memorized, you might as well go public with it from day one. Now, we need a dialectical reaction against that, although it's very, very hard. And the question is this: if you go into a room with some people that you deeply trust, how the fuck do you keep the smartphones out of there? That is key here. It sounds weird.
You have to strip search somebody at the door every time, and even then they probably implant something, or in the future.
Or I would say this, where could you train the capacity to be mystical and esoteric and keep knowledge to yourself because it will be misunderstood if it goes public? Well, for Vark and I share an interest. I think Peterson does too. It's called psychedelics. Okay. Psychedelics is, as far as I know, illegal in all Western countries.
Yeah.
In general, illegal. What's good about getting involved with something that is illegal, personally, I officially only take drugs in Peru or something, what you train yourself in being esoteric. You can't talk about it in public, because if you talk about it in public, then the police needs to arrest you and send you to jail. You know, you get locked up. So you train yourself to keep it quiet about something. Other people who train with this are, for example, people who work within the opposition in China and Iran. China and Iran are currently dictatorships. One of them is Shia Muslim dictatorship. The other one is a communist dictatorship. These two dictatorships, China and Iran, if you live within those cultures, you're trained in being esoteric all the time. There's tons of things you must not talk about, or you can talk about them in an encrypted fashion. Then you get close to the hackers, the most interesting people out there at the moment. The hackers are the army of the next Moses and Aaron. Okay? So when hackers started to go spiritual, not Anglo-Saxon middle-class people, but with the hackers started to go spiritual, really interesting shit is going to happen. Then you get into the mysticism that we need today. And I didn't write about this at all in the Syntheism book, because the mysticism, it's sort of in between the lines, right? But I think that's the idea we need to explore, because what is lacking next to Ecotopianism and Cosmopolitanism is a sort of deep religion, understanding of deep religion. And this is really, you're being told this because we trust you. You're being told this because you're also part in developing it further. Okay? But you cannot go public with this, because if you go public with this, it will be misunderstood and all hell will break loose.
Yeah, well, yeah. And I'm involved in certain things like this, which I'm absolutely certain could not be public, right?
Yeah.
I'm sure you are too, but it just could not be public. It just would not be the least bit understood. This, you know.
So instead of looking for these people who pride themselves on being transparent with everybody and telling everybody everything they go through in their lives, look for people who actually are trained to keep quiet about things. Of course, I'm a psychoanalyst. I must keep quiet about what my analyst sons tell me, according to law. I must even keep quiet about them trying to commit suicide. The only profession where you're not even allowed to call the police if somebody's going to commit suicide is the psychoanalyst. Interesting, huh? Of course, you're trained in keeping quiet about things if you work within a company that works with patents, and most companies do today. So this is a trade secret. You better keep quiet about it. So, but this is getting increasingly hard in a society where the pressure is being pushed. And if everything was transparent and we knew everything about everybody, then the world would be better off. And all I see when people say that is that you don't really want a camera inside your wife's pussy, do you, when you fuck her, right? Okay, unless you're a porn star. But you know, privacy is also an understanding of something you don't go public with. Yeah. So privacy will return in a big way. Yeah. We call it imploitation.
Privacy and the right to intimacy of some kind.
Yeah, but
maybe right is not the word,
but the problem here is that it's a class issue. So the people who will go private about their lives are the ones who can afford to be private. Gated communities. Yeah. What is a gated community? It is a wall that you put up around a place where people live, and you're not allowed to look in unless you live there. So, but I still
you can have gated communities that are not based on class. You can have schools of practice and things like that, esoteric practice that are not based on class.
Well, you do create class because you have external and internal.
Okay.
The second you turn somebody down who knocks the door and says, "No, you're not allowed in. We can't have you here." Naivety has to go.
But it's not because of their socioeconomic status. It's because they're not prepared to do or to play the game that's being played at that.
But listen,
place.
we killed capitalism in our first book called The Netocrats, and we replaced it with something called attentionalism. Class today is attentionalist. It's not capitalist. You can't say socioeconomic any longer. You have to say cultural class. Cultural class defines socioeconomic class. So the cultural class you belong to determines what kind of socioeconomic class you're gonna belong to further down the ladder. The attentionalist society has already arrived. We are living in a world where we're looking for nodes in a chaos. Those nodes are called algorithms.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're also people that lead us. And we look for anybody can lead us out of the chaos we're in. And that's what we do with algorithms every morning. We go online and want to make informed decisions about the things we do in our lives.
Yeah.
And because we go through that filter before we decide anything else, capitalism is dead and over. And we've already moved into the age of attentionalism.
Yeah.
And everything now is about the science of attention. Where do people go? How long do they stay? Do they return? Do they recommend it? Do they use the different services offered? Are they interacting with and identifying with their actions? The whole science of attention is booming today because it is, of course, the only way to get through to people. So attentionalism is already a fact.
Okay.
So that's how we have to understand class today. And that means class today is all about teaching human beings social intelligence, teaching them engineering, teaching them art, languages, psychology, anything that improves your chances of collaborating with and communicating with other people.
So you're talking about a kind of new pragmatic form of education, which is not just sitting in a classroom and listening to a professor speak. You're actually learning what you need to learn.
Zachary Stein, Lena Anderson.
Zachary,
And
that's kind of like funny because I was just thinking about my own experience as I teach in a university, and there's that part of my life which is so separate from the part of my life which is talking to you and being connected to all these people. I'm almost like it's almost like two different worlds. You know what I mean? And so you're living simultaneously in this old world which is dying. It's like a and then there's this whole kind of other thing being born or being created. So I guess it's not self-organizing. I liked what you said before, but it has to also be a vision, but it's self-organizing with a vision, or something like that.
Yeah, it's a bit like the current discourse, spirituality discourse. It's a bit like, okay, we got a problem with schooling here. We don't know what schools are going to do in the future, so we got to put all the students together in a ring. And they're going to talk and authentically relate to each other, and they will suddenly solve everything because the solution to the problem of the schools of the future will suddenly emerge out of that conversation. You hear how ridiculous that sounds. How the heck would students know?
So you have to make new institutions, and you have to...
Well, you got to wait until somebody comes along and has a messianic vision for how it can distribute social intelligence to more people. And for those who aren't born with it, train those who need training. They can be socially intelligent and behave in an increasingly social world.
So that's interesting. Like that's like what the philosopher is in a way. He's kind of a messiah. He comes with there's not been that many great philosophers in the world, right? There's only a few, right? And they always change the world in this radical sense. And they're kind of like the messiah that you're talking about. You have to wait for the one person who just changes the entire world, like Descartes or something, or the next one,
or Hegel or Nietzsche,
all these people. There's few of them. They're so
So they're the priestly version of the Messianic. Okay. What I'm talking about here is the chieftain version of the Messianic, who goes at the front, not Aaron. I'm talking about Moses. So that's the difference. So Moses is where we need to tie into the machines. And certainly the machines will be helpful to the priestly messianic mission too, because priests certainly don't have a problem hiring machines to do things for them.
So who's Moses? He's not an intellectual particularly. He's like who's Moses?
I am actually researching this with young, very clever engineers in Scandinavia at the moment. And what we're doing is we're basically putting forward a drawing board. And they were saying, how about the engineer's chieftain? How about the engineer's priest? And we discovered that some of the guys who studied engineering and are very successful at it now, and they're in their early 30s, are discovering, I have more of the priestly archetype personality. And another guy in the room goes, yeah, but I have more of the chieftainly, character to me.
I teach engineers and managers, you know, so the engineers are more like in the priestly caste, and the managers are more like the, you know, the guys who want to go out and do something.
I'm teaching nothing but digital transformation leadership from next year.
Yeah.
That's all I'm teaching now in Scandinavia. So, and this is very interesting because then we get an idea of engineering that goes into deep history. What is engineering? Where did it start from? And you know,
well, that's a good question.
And the disasters in history, like the Tower of Babel, could the Tower of Babel be built today and no longer be a disaster? That's a question that's interesting to ask. Why did we go to the moon? Who came up with that idea? You know, these feats, for good or bad, need to be redefined and revisited. And that's what young engineers are incredibly interested in. And once you've got a bunch of engineers standing at the top of their toes in the room, you're certainly talking about the phallic. And then you and I are working in a territory where currently the spirituality discourse in North America is not even close to. So I find it complementary, the kind of work we do. I think both projects need to be respected. I think there's a tremendous value out of a dialogue coming out of this. I hope to have it with Futurica, for example. I think there's tremendous dialogue coming out of this. And if Jordan Peterson understands it comes out of it, Zoroaster next to me, that'd be even better, because, you know, what we're talking about is the idea of the Jordan Peterson, the Zoroastrian, and John Futurica, the Buddhist, in a dialogue with each other. So if the Zoroastrian and the Buddhist goes into dialogue with each other, if the phallic and the magical go into dialogue with each other, we can both talk about the new grand narrative that's needed, and we can also talk about the container within which that narrative must arrive.
Okay, that's nice. That's a nice picture.
It's very Aristotelian. But
I got a question for you.
Yeah,
I got a question for you. And often you're talking about the phallus and young men being important and all that. What about young women these days? Like, where do they fit in, and what do they have to do, and what?
No, young women will certainly feel a lot of attraction to this whole sort of Western Buddhist approach to spirituality. Complexity is something they understand by nature. That's what Bonita Roy is, a woman. Okay, many women in the field of complexity science, and they do great work. No, I don't think that it's a problem for women at all. And also, women are way more socially intelligent than men are by nature. So the average young woman today has 4 times as many Facebook friends as the average young man. So I don't worry about that which others take care of. So ironically, Jordan Peterson has put the foot on something which he hasn't fulfilled, which is the need for phallic vision. Because that was explosive, behind Jordan Peterson, all these other voices have stepped forward, but they're all talking about the magical here, or feminine. They're talking about the container. And
so that in a way, that's the self-organizing thing that works by itself, whereas the male is something that needs to be developed. That's why there's men's groups and people are finding that to be so important.
That's why so many cultures circumcise their boys. It's like reminding the boys every time you look down, your foreskin's gone. You're reminded that this foreskin was taken away from you when you were a kid, because in your own nature as you are, you're dangerous. But when you're cultured and trained and domesticated, you'll be wonderful. It is the understanding that the shift from nature to culture, the containment of sexuality, the control of sexuality so that it's directed in the right direction makes all the difference. This is what growing up is all about. This is why we have the 3 stages of the child, of the adult, and of the God. So if the child aspires to be the God, all hell breaks loose. If the child learns to imitate to one day become a grown-up, goes through a proper rite of passage, then learns he's still young, or she's still young, need to learn more, but you're now respected as a grown-up because you can support yourself. Then you come into the mode where you can even be a parent, you can contribute to the larger community, you create value that's way more than you need for yourself. You create an abundance of value of some kind. Then you're really, truly a grown-up. Then you shine, and you have the years where you shine, and then eventually you become an older person who needs the support of others again materially, but you supplied the wisdom. This whole chain is what nomadology is over the lifespan. So this nomadology over the lifespan is the filter through which we need to understand what it means to be a boy, a man, and a god, or a girl, a woman, or a goddess. And the god and the goddess are only transcendental ideals that we have to know where we're going to go next when we're grown up. So what do you aspire to as a grown up? You aspire to create something bigger and better than yourself for your children to inherit. This is fundamental to civilization.
Yeah.
And creating this heritage that others can build on to create something even better and even more beautiful is just the next step on the Tower of Babel that you're building. This is what civilization, this is fundamentally Zoroastrian. It was the Zoroastrians who discovered this some little more than 3,000 years ago and started seeing the beauty in civilization and realized that when we settle down, we take the nomadic energy and instead of spending it on traveling through a physical landscape, we instead travel through our ideas. What we started to do 5,000 years ago was that, okay, we're still on the move, but we're now on the move through ideas and technology rather than we're on the move literally through landscape. And that's when we stop being nomadic, we settle down, and we can create civilization.
Right.
But we still have to understand ourselves as nomadological.
Okay.
And this is where I take social philosophy into the realm of process philosophy. The other end where process philosophy is exploding at the moment is in physics. And that's because physics is now moving into loop quantum gravity. It's moving into the holographic principle. And if you study physics and the holographic principle, you discover that's just process philosophy taken to its extreme in the physical environment. I'm doing the same thing with the social environment. I'm taking process philosophy into social. And what I'm discovering then is that if we understand social completely and how human beings relate to each other, we need to go back to the original nomadic tribe, the sociant, to understand ourselves.
Right. That's the other thing I was going to ask you to speak about was the sociant, right?
The sociant or sociontology is the study of what the original tribe might have looked like. The tribe that we lived in for the longest possible times that shaped our genetic makeup more than anything else.
Yeah. So it's like the arrow goes to both ways. It goes forward. The future vision is by going as far back as possible, you know.
Yeah, but a lot of guys these days start with talking about the Big Bang and they make a PowerPoint presentation about the Big Bang. That didn't even happen, by the way. But, you know, that's not interesting to us as human beings. What's interesting as human beings is the beginning of life. Whenever that happened first on this planet. And the story of the origin of life is a human on this planet. Stay on this planet and try to create it. And that's why the origin of life is the story that needs to be retold and deepened to then understand Ecotopia. Whereas the story of the Cosmopole is the story of human beings settled down and started going nomadic in their minds, and their ideas traveled, and their ideas were on the move. And that movement will be accomplished with the establishment of the Cosmopole. These two major products, in turn, when you internalize them, then becomes the difference between esoteric and exoteric, and where you put, what do I keep my mouth shut about and what do I tell people in public, becomes a value you have to make depending on the overall goal.
Okay.
Now you started thinking utopianism properly. So, unless the guys out there don't involve sexuality in what they say, they're faking it. Okay, don't trust anybody who doesn't have a functioning sex life to begin with. You can't do philosophy without sexuality. You can't. You got to get your own dick, your own pussy into it. You know, it's just, you can't do art without it. You'd be just banal. So why do you think philosophy would be anything but banal if people pretended this was some kind of dialogue we have in salons with our clothes on and sexuality doesn't exist? It becomes infantile because of it. Unless there's a deep understanding and a deep involvement of sexuality into the world of philosophy, it's not philosophy proper. Then you haven't really understood what Nietzsche meant with will to power and what we, Söderqvist and I, call will to intelligence. You haven't understood will unless you first understand horny. You don't understand horny unless you understand sexuality. So
drives or something, right?
Yeah, exactly. So the Anglo-Saxon, the Anglo-Saxon terrification, can we call it that? Are you terrified of something? The terrification. That's
I've never heard that word before, but
we just invented it. We just invented it. I've been looking for a word like
terror of, like extreme terror.
Terrification is like a culture that immerses itself in the terror of something. So the terrification of sexuality that is so predominant in Anglo-Saxon culture. It just comes back and it bites you in the ass, because if you try to do philosophy or even metaphysics without sexuality, you're just a little boy or a little girl dreaming. You're not doing the proper job yet. the Freudian revolution means that we can't do philosophy without sexuality any longer, at least not credibly. And the tantric, of course, always knew this, right? Sexuality was always in philosophy if you were an Easterner. So that's in India, Iran, China, that's taken for granted. I don't know where this prudishness came from in Europe, probably from Christianity, but it didn't help us much. And all I say to people is that never trust a guy who doesn't have a functioning sex life, right? Because that would permeates into everything he says and thinks or whatever.
Like, don't trust a monk or something like that, or?
Oh, monks often have very functioning sex lives because they're tantric. So yeah, so no. I would say people who thought seriously about it and made decisions on how they're going to direct their sexual energy into something more spiritual, they know what they're talking about.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay.
I don't trust
people who are unable to embody that in a way. Or,
well, people who try to avoid it,
or
right?
try to avoid it, or are going to just abstraction and intellectualization in the mind because they're just uncomfortable in a body and can't have sex or.
Exactly. So I don't trust anybody who speaks highly of Jung but refuses to deal with Freud. Because Jung tries to desexualize Freud's work. He goes off in some really interesting directions because of it. So he's very useful. But at the end of the day, there's a sexuality lacking in Jung. He probably fucked his patients. That's what he did.
Oh, he did. But yeah, he had a few relationships. But I was surrounded by women. I thought he was quite sexual.
But in terms of activity, but the problem was that his work then wasn't consequent with that. So you can't.
I think he was not I've heard he was not a father figure. Like, he was more like everybody's friend. Somebody, who was it? Was it Alder said that or something like? Anyway, yeah.
He was cool, but you can't do Jung without Freud, or you miss the point entirely. And with Hegel, it's the opposite way. Hegel has enormous phallic energy. But the phallic energy in Hegel is completely turned into theoretical game. What it's like a priest who doesn't have a chieftain and plays the priestly game fully. That's why I'm a Hegelian. You can't be a priest without being Hegelian, because Hegel makes you think. Okay, so you learn how to think from Hegel. But the consequence of Hegel, what he left behind, was precisely the revolution of the 19th century when Schopenhauer, Darwin, Freud, and Nietzsche came along, and they all dealt with willpower. They all dealt with willpower. They all dealt with what puts things on the move. What is the damn energy? Yeah, exactly.
So will is phallic energy. This will that Schopenhauer and everybody talks about is phallic energy.
Exactly. It is magical energy too, to be honest about, but it's definitely phallic energy because it is a will towards something. Whereas magical energy is will to contain something. So that's exactly why that happened in Europe in the 19th century. That's exactly why the French and the Germans still go nude bathing and have kinky clubs and everything. And, they let their children swim around naked, whereas in America, you put a bikini on the kid when the kid turns 2. So the prudishness of Anglo-Saxon culture is problematic. And it's especially problematic when you're going to deal with something called philosophy and add philosophy to the mix of politics and spirituality. So you're going to end up with something that lacks sexuality and lacks sex. So because it lacks sex, don't trust it. That's why you and I are going into Tantra to understand Tantra, because these are traditions that are thousands of years old that unify our thinking, our mind, with sexuality. So you become a fully embodied person. So that, I think, is key here and very important as we go forward. I hope for more dialogue. I hope for more work. I'm sure there are other guys out there who see things the way we do and have discovered the same things we've discovered. We'll have to go into dialogue with them. You and I love the intellectual deep web. It's a stormy little forum online, but it's a good place to go. Not dark web, deep web. Intellectual deep web is a good place to go to find other people who are thinking about these things in a very sort of straightforward and open manner. And good dialogue, by the way. Speaking of ladies sitting together in a group to see what emerges, but but at the end of the day, I don't think the Messianic is going to come out of these conversations. It's not. And we will probably provide some tips for people who design technological intelligence, if they care to listen. But at the end of the day, the Messianic is going to come out of a few people who really, in a concentrated way, has sat down and thought through this properly at a distance, and they can then step back as shamans from the forest, put on the priestly robe, and come into the arena and tell us what they see.
Okay.
So it's not going to emerge out of little ladies having coffee and babbling forever. No, it's going to emerge out of people who've done deep, deep studies.
Yeah.
We need to do deep history, deep psychology, deep science.
Yeah.
We need to go deep. We need to understand physics. We need to understand biology. And you can't do complexity theory and just say, well, something just emerged and it was some, you know, bigger than the sum of its parts. Well, that's just sloppy. What is emergence?
Yeah. Well,
Terence Deacon, other guys have worked extensively on this issue, try to solve the issue. What is an emergence? And what qualitative differences are there between emergences? There's certainly a hierarchy of emergences to us humans. Not all events are equal. Some events are way more valuable to us than other events are. And this study is called eventology. It's also a new area of philosophy today. We need an eventology. We need to understand what is it along the time axis that really has value to us. Which ones are the singularities? Which ones are the emergences? Which ones are the events that happen along the time axis? Why are they valuable to us? And how do we relate that to our own spiritual experiences?
Oh, there's a lot there.
So we can contain and cultivate those experiences and memorize them and use them. So all of this work has to be done.
Yeah.
Eventology, nomadology are my two favorite areas at the moment that I work with. They tie into many of the traditional areas like metaphysics and phenomenology, but that's where I work at the moment. And anybody's interested in these things and is working on it or is a student of these matters, please get in contact with us and we'll start the dialogue and we'll go forward together.
Okay, you just said about 50 things that could be other conversations. So
yeah,
I don't really know where to go now.
Well, I got the silver phallus this time.